My name is Morgan Fox. I'm the political director for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, or NORML. NORML was founded in 1970 with a singular purpose: to protect and support people who consume cannabis. For the last 5 decades, NORML and its affiliate chapters across the country have worked to enact common sense cannabis policies. We've fought to end arrests and collateral sanctions and discrimination against cannabis consumers and their families. We've promoted legal, safe, and affordable access. And we have worked to make whole those who have suffered under prohibition. Representative Earl Blumenauer has been with us pretty much every step of the way. From his home state in Oregon and all the way to the halls of Congress, he has been an outspoken, unwavering, and unapologetic champion of sensible cannabis policy reform. As a member of Congress, he helped found the Congressional Cannabis Caucus and has personally led the charge on countless bills, including most recently the Veterans Equal Access Act, which would protect veterans and allow VA doctors who recommend medical cannabis in states where it's legal, and the Small Business Tax Equity Act to facilitate fair federal taxation for licensed cannabis businesses. He also helped write the MORE Act, the only comprehensive legalization bill to ever be approved in a chamber of Congress. Anyone who consumes cannabis, anyone who cares about somebody that does, and anyone who values justice owes him a huge debt of gratitude. It's been a pleasure working with him and the wonderful folks in his office to chip away at the disaster that is prohibition. I look forward to the day when we can celebrate its end together. Without further ado, Representative Earl Blumenauer.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Morgan. I will. Thank you. Thank you so much for being here. This is an extraordinary gathering at a very important time. Morgan, we appreciate NORML has been with us every step of the way. When Oregon was the first state to decriminalize cannabis, NORML was there in the gallery, being a part of that process. Today you're going to have 9 members of the House and Senate, the majority leader of the Senate, where all our legislation went to die. Not that way this time. For the first time, Senate leadership is on our side and advocating for reform. I've been doing this virtually all my adult life. It's time for the federal government to catch up with what you've been involved with around the country. I have found it exciting to be involved with those campaigns. Most of them were initiative campaigns where the voters made their wishes known. We started the bipartisan Cannabis Caucus with then Representative Rohrabacher, Governor Polis, and the late Don Young. The idea was to create space on Capitol Hill where the certified smart young people who really run the place could be able to come together to learn and to strategize. It's been an amazing journey. We now have 155 million Americans who live in a state where some form of cannabis is legal. Support for legalization is at an all-time high. When Oregon took those first steps, it was not, shall we say, a majority opinion with the general public. It was much more controversial. Today, 68% of Americans, including majorities of Republicans, Democrats, and independents, support legalization. Congress needs to catch up with the American people. It's been a fascinating journey watching people understand the power that is available to us with this special substance. As I've traveled the country, I have been inspired by what I have seen with veterans, people suffering from epilepsy, those who have been targeted by this disastrous war on drugs who have not given up. veterans struggling with PTSD and a whole range of other conditions inspired our Veterans Access, equal access, to finally allow the VA to be able to treat, even talk about this with the medical professionals who know them best. And I'm proud that we're moving again with the Veterans Equal Access legislation. And my friend Brian Mast, who, when we rolled it out, gave perhaps the second most inspirational speech I've ever heard dealing with cannabis. I am proud that our research bill was the first standalone cannabis reform that has been enacted since the adoption of the Controlled Substance Act. This legislation is hard to overstate its impact. One of the problems we have now in terms of issues that deal with supply chains, deal with people who are unable to participate in the economy, is because we have no good test for impairment. Nobody wants people who are involved with heavy equipment to be impaired by cannabis or alcohol or anything else. But because of this bizarre prohibition on cannabis research, we've had to outsource this to Canada or Israel, and we have not developed a good test for impairment. And as a result, I mean, in any given week, there are tens of thousands of Americans who are disqualified with a pre-employment drug test. What would the impact be if we had the same stringent standards for alcohol? That somebody had had a beer last week or last month being denied access to employment. Well, I think we're going to finally turn the corner on that, and it's going to have very profound consequences. These issues cover such a broad spectrum of involvement. I was a child legislator in Oregon when we started this, but watching what has happened is just inspirational for me. Yes, it's taken longer than it should. It's like Lucy and the football. But as a practical matter, the progress that has been made is stunning. We passed the Fair Banking Act 7 times, only to disappear in Mitch McConnell's hospice in the Senate. But that's not the case now with Senator Schumer, whom you'll hear, my friend Ron Wyden, Cory Booker, champions of reform who are going to help unlock the Senate. Now, make no mistake, the landscape continues to be challenging. It's frustrating to me that some of these lessons are so hard to penetrate when the American public has leapfrogged ahead of us. And I can't say enough about how much I appreciate what the advocates have done, giving real-life stories about the disastrous impact of this failed war on drugs. You have been resilient, resolute, tenacious, and you've helped change the conversation on Capitol Hill, and more importantly, you've changed it in communities across the country. You've sparked the change in public attitudes that has made the reform to date possible and will make more progress happen faster and more effectively. Now, to be clear, there are a few challenges. We have replaced Chairman Jerry Nadler of the Judiciary Committee, who has been a champion on this issue almost as long as I have. He was doing this in the 1970s, and he was masterful in his leadership of the House Judiciary Committee, including and being able to have bipartisan support for the MORE Act. I can't say enough about how critical Jerry's leadership have been, and designating two certified smart full-time staff members to help us refine the MORE Act. It's tough business to draft legislation that deals with cannabis because of all the entanglements. And Jerry and his team helped us navigate it and gave us a good, solid piece of legislation that passed the House and can be a foundation for where we go from here. Jerry's been replaced by Congressman Jordan, who doesn't share Jerry's, I want to be delicate here, but he just doesn't have quite Jerry's perspective on cannabis reform. But we have opportunities to be able to move past that. And I think we've reached the point where one committee chair is not going to be able to stifle what we need going forward. And the beauty here with the leadership in the Senate, I think we can have a vehicle that will be our instrument for reform that comes on the heels of movement through the Senate and deal with these individual items. The other thing that is really encouraging for me is watching the actions of President Biden. This was not necessarily an issue he ran on in the past. It's not been something that he's assumed leadership on. But President Biden pardoning thousands of offenders, and which sparked action around the country for more ambitious efforts at the state level. Very, very important. And he has initiated a review of the scheduling. Now, I have my own biases here. I don't think it should be scheduled at all. If we were dealing with a Controlled Substance Act today, cannabis wouldn't be scheduled at all. What would be a Schedule I controlled substance would be nicotine, which actually does affect human health and is highly addictive. But I think what you're watching here is part of the tectonic plates shifting. And this is very, very important. And when we get this process rolling, if there's any realistic, honest reappraisal, I think it leads to the conclusion that cannabis shouldn't be scheduled at all. We're a long way away from that, but I think we're starting a process that leads that. And as you know, there are a number of avenues that could be followed by the federal government to achieve this objective that actually don't require legislative action. So I'm very optimistic seeing what the federal government is doing. I will also say my view of what's happening internationally is encouraging. I had several trips to Latin America this last year. They're looking at this issue differently, particularly Colombia, looking at a reset in terms of their approach to managing their drug problem. And it is intense, and there are massively entrenched cartels. But of course, we've got those in Southern Oregon and Northern California. But this is an important step for that country. What we've seen in Mexico and Canada, we've got most of North America legalized. We want America to catch up with our neighbors to the north and the south. And while we're at it, I am looking forward to making a statutory change where we don't have the prospect of somebody being banned for life coming into the United States because they take medical cannabis. That is hopelessly outdated and unfair and has not been rigorously enforced, but it shouldn't be. So lots of opportunities for us to be able to zero in and be able to make this progress going forward. I appreciate what's happened with people involved with the industry. I've been pleased that they have stepped up in terms of helping us on some of the social justice issues and being clear about ways that we need to manage this at the state level. I appreciate earlier comments from one of your former speakers who talked about regulating it right on the state level. Low tax, low barriers to entry, having provisions to help deal with the inequities in terms of the criminal justice system. These are things that we ought to do to open up this industry for the people who paid such a terrible price for the failed war on drugs. And the sooner we get our arms around this and move forward, the better off we're going to be. Just to the point here, on 420, I think it's appropriate to reflect on where we are and, more important, on where we're going. I appreciate your being here to be a part of this. I appreciate being able to be able to join you for the discussion. I appreciate our partnership in Washington, D.C. and around the country in carrying this message to the American people and making progress. I am, as I said, quite optimistic. This can be the session of Congress where we finally lay this to rest and make progress on so many different levels. But your advocacy, your leadership, and your involvement has been critical, and I appreciate you for it. It's an honor to be your partner. All right, big guy? Okay. All right.
If we could, as Caroline mentioned at the opening of the program, we are deeply appreciative for your office, for how you have been with this movement at every step of the way, including securing us this room for this day. So one more time, please join me in thanking Earl Blumenauer for his leadership tirelessly on this issue. We are not going to win without your help. So thank you again, Earl.